We need 3 people for quorum, right?
We do. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Augustine. Thanks for your message. Thanks for being here. We're just waiting to for more task force members to join.
Sure. I was wondering if
Cool.
we should ping anyone, but we did send materials and agendas out, so.
Yeah. Do you want me to, what do you think, Megan? Should we ping people or have we done enough?
Irene. Well, let me send a quick message.
Sure. Hi, Nelson. Thanks for joining.
Hey, what's going on?
Great.
We're just waiting for a couple more folks to join.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. I'm gonna get some water.
I'm going to send Darlene a quick text.
Sounds good.
Maybe, well, yeah. Not sure. I just emailed the group too
Great.
to let them know we're hanging out waiting for quorum.
Oh.
I think at our last meeting, the full task force meeting, we canceled a lot of subcommittees. Maybe some of the committee members are getting confused and thinking this was also canceled.
I think that is the case,
Maybe, yeah.
unfortunately.
Hmm.
I think we could continue to have conversations. We just can't take action on anything, but there's no action scheduled. So
Yeah, we don't really have action items.
we don't have action items. What direction do you want to go? Nelson and she?
Emily is asking for the Zoom link.
Okay,
Okay, are you able to give that to her?
Yeah, I'm working on that now.
Awesome, thank you.
great. It looks like we have Darlene too. Hi, Darlene.
Hi,
Thanks for
Wonderful.
joining.
sorry for the confusion.
Not at all. It was a confusing time. Emily is getting the link from Caleb and we'll log in and then we'll get going. Well, we can actually get going because now we have quorum. Go through the front end fluffy stuff. All right, here we go. Yes, sorry, there was some confusion with our shuffling and reshuffling, but we did decide to keep the Community Outreach Subcommittee, the Grants and Resources Subcommittee, and the AB 524 Subcommittee because they were all talking about things that were a little bit independent of the report recommendations themselves, but the other four subcommittee meetings got canceled and those were replaced with working group sessions. So here we are today for community outreach. Thanks for joining, everyone. I'm going to fly through the front end slides. Participation guidelines, the same as usual. Cultivating a space where we can share, listen, and learn from each other and be mutually respectful of all different perspectives. And staying on point, today's discussion focused on community engagement. Public comment, we'll skip through that and review those processes if we need them. Everyone knows how to Zoom right now. Here is our plan. We're booked until 5. We kind of have a lot to talk about actually, so let's see how much time we need. We'll do a quick review and approval of the December notes. That was the last time we met about 5 months ago in this working group. And then working session. So we want to give you a more comprehensive update on the May through September engagement plans. A little bit more information than we had available to you at our May full task force meeting. And then continue conversations about how to incorporate all the things that we've been learning along the way from site visits and engagement sessions and the survey input. And additional ideas that you all may have for how to include more context, case studies, and other things, maybe like outreach best practices in the final report. So this is kind of an important opportunity for us to gather some insights, especially because if you recall, and for folks listening online, maybe if you're live streaming on the Zoom, because we don't have any attendees yet, but the task force members are finishing up their review of the May version of their full reports, and then we are compiling edits and we will get another draft back to you all as task force members on June 14th. So the conversations today might have some influence on that next draft that's coming out in a couple of weeks. Okay, quick roll call to establish quorum. Let's start with Chair Nelson Huggins.
I am present.
Wonderful. Vice Chair Emily Burguigno.
Hoka here.
Wonderful. Member Darlene Franco.
Present,
Member Chizo.
Here.
Wonderful, quorum is established with 4 of our 5 members. Member Irene de Baracua is not yet on, and if and when she joins, we will read her into the record. Dun, dun, dun. All right, first item of business, approval of the December 13th, 2024 meeting summary. Would anyone like to talk about this or provide some proposed edits?
I was just gonna ask who and when were these sent to task force members? I need to find them.
I believe they were sent before the end of the calendar year. I will have to pull up my email thread, meaning about 5 months ago.
Yeah, it would make sense to resend it because I have to do the same. So when we have these meetings, having that at the top of the email for review is my preference.
Sure, we can do that. So would you like to postpone a conversation or an approval of this, or would you like to move forward with any other conversation we would all like to have?
I haven't read them, so I would say postpone it.
Okay,
Yeah, same. I haven't read it, so I'd abstain from a vote or anything like that.
excellent. Then we'll table the approval of the December meeting summary until a subsequent meeting. All right, working session. Tessa, take it away, and please let me know when you would like me to advance your slide.
Thank you. You can go to the next slide. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see your faces. You can be on video. It's great to see you. Most of this session, most of the next maybe hour and a half or so will be mainly hearing from you all. I'm not going to do as much talking as I think I probably did back in December. So if you do want to be on video, that'd be great. I'm just going to start here with a quick update on our engagement plans for the next 3-4 months or so. And then we'll really get into the discussion and lots of prompting questions for you all. So starting with May, which we're at the end of, I just wanted to note that we did have presentations to the CDFA Small Scale and BIPOC Producer Advisory Committees. Thea Rittenhouse, member of the task force, and CDFA Farm Equity Advisor helped to coordinate that. And we got a couple of good questions and small pieces of feedback in those meetings. Next week, you can see May through June. This is the UCANR, that acronym is off, UCANR engagement sessions. So these are the engagement sessions that have been happening with different farmers around the state and a couple of tribal sessions that are coming up in June. This was a collaboration, as you all will remember. We've mentioned it many times over the past 6 to 8 months to really expand our capacity as a staff and as a task force to do all of the engagement with all the different groups that were being requested. And so that's in the works. The summary of those sessions will be shared in August in the next quarterly task force meeting. In July, we will have a couple of structured site visits. So this was something that was offered back in March after another community engagement conversation with the full task force. And a couple of folks have taken advantage of this offer to, go on site visits kind of outside of the context of these quarterly meetings that you all are having. So we'll be doing one of those in Oxnard in Ventura County and another one between Fresno and Bakersfield. So those are in the works. Details TBD, but they'll roughly happen in July. We're planning a couple more tribal engagement sessions in July through August, with the last one right before the quarterly meeting in Arcata. And by August 31st, we are in the process now, and we'll finish the process by the end of August, following up with everybody that we have already engaged over the past year and a few months. And so that, again, was another request from the task force back in March to make sure that we're kind of closing that loop, letting folks know who have contributed to the process that there's a draft of the report and there's recommendations to look at and all the different ways that they can provide feedback. So that's happening. Some of those will happen with in-person visits in coordination with that Fresno Bakersfield trip, for example. Others will happen virtually. And then also by the end of August, we will wrap up the process of meeting with any tribal nation that responds to the letter that you all know we're working on and we'll be sending out in the next couple days. And so before we go on to the next slide, of course, any questions, if anyone has questions or comments, I welcome you to jump in here.
Can you explain a little bit more by August 31st, follow up with previous engagement efforts?
Yeah, so that will be with site visit hosts. It will be with anyone who participated in engagement sessions. It will be with guest speakers. So that will be really kind of a second touch point with everyone who has contributed.
I mean, how?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on the region and our other engagement efforts. So for example, we will invite different folks who we engaged with in Coachella to the tribal engagement session that's going to be happening in San Diego. We will invite any tribal members who we engage with in the Fresno region to the San Joaquin Valley tribal engagement session that we're planning. In other cases, we're doing virtual follow-up. So we're sending we're sending like the summary of the report out to site visit hosts, for example, and asking if they want to engage or if they have any comments. So it's really tailored, but essentially I have the list of everybody that we have met with or learned from and all the different ways that we've done that. And we're working out how to make sure we get in touch with all of those folks. And I think in some cases, we still have some follow-up to do with task force members. So for example, you connected us to a site visit in the Salinas area, and we'd love to connect with you about the best way to follow up with that farmer. Same with Ruth for a couple of folks that her organization connected us to in Fresno. So it's really tailored based on the region and the person.
Okay.
Does that help a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. Emily.
To kind of continue with Chi's question, I would just want to reaffirm that if we are asking of these folks to come to the sessions, that they are provided some type of honorarium support so that they can be supported if we're asking of them to come all that way. Because Coachella to Golden Eagle is about 3 to 4 hours, depending on the traffic. So just keeping that in mind. And I'm sure that's already an option. I'm just saying that to reaffirm it. And then I did want to, I know we've connected via text on this when it comes to the UCNAR sessions, but I wanted to mention it within the meeting so that it is in our notes, as well as so the task force members are aware that the flyer and outreach that they are using for the tribal session they're doing is getting kind of some mixed feedback online, specifically on social media, because it was shared in a group that I'm part of. So I was able to see those responses and feedback from tribal experts. And it was around the language as well as the honorarium amount that is being provided. And I believe it's 200. But there was the recommendation in providing more than that within the feedback, as well as the language around it. I'm trying to see if I can pull that. Do you have that, Tessa, available? And if we don't want to spend too much time on this, then I can share that via email with the folks. But for the meeting's sake and for anybody who's listening, attendees, that's why I was asking, maybe we can bring it up. But yeah, just the language and just knowing that it isn't, facilitated or developed with any tribal experts. So that's why these things come up when tribal experts aren't included in, the development of these sessions. And I would recommend, it's a little late because it's already developed and it's out there, but had maybe some of the task force members, or maybe they have a tribal liaison at their UC. I don't know, but these things come up. So I just wanted to mention it in the meeting, and I know I've already mentioned it via text, so.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing, Emily.
Because it is a very extractive process. So having those best practices, especially when you're asking from tribal nations and experts, there has to be some type of trust. And just to see the feedback it's already getting online is concerning. So I already, I shared it and everything. So I'm just giving the feedback that I seen online to the group here.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, and we can pass that along to the team as well, who's working on the session. Go ahead, Chi.
Adding on Emily's comments, I think this is too late to bring this up. I think makes way much sense to contract some tribal nations to host some of the tribal listening sessions instead of contracting a big organization and just to ask them to do all those community engagement sessions. I think different communities, they have different different experts, or different organizations have different experts of outreach to different communities. For tribal engagement sessions, I think we should contract with tribal nations and some other experts, and same thing with other communities too.
Yeah, thank you for that. Go ahead, Darlene, and then I'll respond just to try to help with some context.
So I'm a little confused. So this, that UCNR is doing, it's for us? It's on our behalf? Okay. So I didn't understand that. And so, and I've seen a couple of dates, I think June 3rd and 11th. And then also, and then also another one on the 20th. That's at UC Davis. Is that something totally different?
Yeah, I'm not.
Oh
that's
my
not
goodness.
connected to us. I'm not aware of the 20th. Yeah.
And it sounds like it's, I mean, the language, land equity task force. And the language on the June 20th meeting sounds very similar to what we're doing. So it's very confusing. And if I'm confused, I'm sure other Native people that are being asked to come to these meetings or be a part of this are getting, more confused as well. So I think we need to look at that. And I just seen a few of the comments Emily's talking about. I didn't see a whole lot, but yeah, there is some, there's a lot of conversation about it. So.
Okay. Happy to follow up if you want to provide more of those details, either to myself or UCNR. We can pass those along. And this is connected to maybe a conversation that we'll have a bit later about considering how this subcommittee and the task force more broadly might comment on best practices for outreach. We've sort of simulated a process throughout the past year, and of course, there's always room for improvement. So we could always pick this conversation up again to kind of flesh it out a bit more. Yeah, Emily, go ahead.
I was just going to also, reaffirm, because I did mention it to you as well, that I'd be reaching out to the facilitator and listed on the flyer there, Christina. And then just kind to wanting to review the facilitation of those webinars to ensure,
Mhm.
you know, those best practices are applied. And it says, yeah, Monday, June 2nd and or Wednesday, June 11th from 10 to 12.
Yeah, that sounds great. Happy to connect you to, she had already mentioned that that would be definitely some welcome support if you all are interested in that. And I think I had mentioned in that email that especially the tribal members of the task force were invited to attend those sessions if you'd like to, welcome, introduce yourself, introduce the task force, listen in, etc. So those are all very welcome forms of participation. And I just commenting on the confusing aspect of all of these different engagement sessions that different organizations and agencies are doing. Someone has shared a couple other, kind of parallel events looking at indigenous foodways and resilient agriculture. And it's kind of out of our hands when other people planned other events. So there's always more coordination to be done, but just wanting to note that there are a lot of consultation and engagement efforts coming up. And yeah, I think, just to be really transparent, as I said, we collaborated with UCANR. The partnership was really essential to make some of this engagement happen. And I think it'll be good in that we'll get a diversity of forms of engagement. So their session, for example, are inviting, land stewards, tribal technical assistance providers, in addition to tribal members and tribal leaders, whereas the sessions that we're doing in San Diego, the one that we did in Susanville, those are specifically led by tribal members, collaborating with organizations in the context of Golden Eagle, for example, and then specifically inviting tribal leaders. So I think we will get different forms of input as one positive aspect of this sort of diversity of engagement sessions. So yeah, thank you all for that feedback. Happy to talk more as needed. And I think I want to keep going if everyone's ready. Okay. Yeah, so, and just to note, regarding all of that engagement that I just kind of walked through and that we still have coming up, as you know, staff have been summarizing what we learn after each session and then putting it in those summary documents on the Google Drive, which we also shared out again in advance of this meeting. And so we will continue to do that. But the goal of this meeting today was to take just a little bit more time with the site visit summaries, the engagement sessions summaries, and the survey, because we didn't really get to talk much about those during the May meeting. And so I wanted to hear from this subcommittee, your reflections on those summaries and on those engagement activities, and what insights are really important for you to make sure show up in the report. And so that's kind of the point of the first half of this conversation today. And then the other thing to note is that as we are generating these summaries and doing all of this learning and these engagement activities, the idea is that, task force members are reviewing and highlighting the insights that should be incorporated into the report, and staff are noticing, based on the timeline, that the kind of most efficient and effective way to incorporate those learnings into the report is basically to do that iteratively. So for example, we're updating the draft right now, and we're incorporating the insights that were learned in the Susanville tribal engagement session, in the Coachella engagement session, etc. And then you all, of course, will be looking at that draft over the next few weeks, over the next month or so, and getting a chance to see, how staff incorporated that. And so we're also going to be tagging kind of like the source of maybe new information or additions from those engagement activities, but just wanting to note that rather than kind of putting the summary in front of you and going line by line, we think it's probably best for us to just be incorporating that iteratively. So I just wanted to mention that, and you can look out for that in your next draft. Okay, so now we're going to get into the discussion with you all. These are some prompting questions that we had sent out. I think the first part of this conversation, I want to get your reflections on the site visits and the engagement sessions, and then we can get into the survey in a little bit. And so the questions for you are really to be thinking about what are some key insights, maybe some themes that you're seeing across all of these summaries and all the engagement activities, and where are there maybe gaps in the report where you're not seeing what we're learning in the engagement sessions being reflected in the report as effectively as it maybe should be. And so, some examples of ways that you might then suggest that we update the report to reflect what we're learning is through case studies or making specific updates to the recommendations, adding recommendations, modifying existing recommendations, maybe adding different sections to the report. So that's what I want to do for the next maybe 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes or so, is focus on the site visits and engagement sessions, and then we can move on to the survey. So if you go to the next slide, Megan, I think there's a case study example. This is just kind of something to jog your guys' brains and imagination. You can see this is kind of one way that a case study might show up in the report. And we'll talk more in detail about what that might include, I think, a little bit later in the meeting. So if you want to go to the next slide. Okay, yeah, that's great. So I'm going to take about 4 to 5 minutes right now and actually just sit here in silence. You can all turn off your videos if you want. And the idea is that I want to give you all time to really review the site visit summaries and the engagement summary document. So flag us if you don't have those in front of you. They should be in that most recent email from Megan, but let us know if you don't have those. And the goal is really to come back in the next 4 to 5 minutes and share some key insights that you want to make sure we're going to be highlighting in the report, and then thinking about how and where to do that. So if it is a case study, or if it is, maybe adding some more detail to a specific section of the report, or adding a new recommendation. So I'll give you some time now. We'll put on a little timer and come back at about 3:39 or so. Any questions? Well, feel free to pop, on and off mute and video as needed. Oh, and also noting, if you're looking at the Coachella engagement session summary, page 5 is where the recommendations really come in, just to kind of focus your attention if you want to take a look there. Okay, one more minute. All right, everybody, if you're ready, you can come back into the discussion. Everyone ready? Give me a thumbs up or come back on camera when you are. Thank you. So, thank you. Thanks for the thumbs up. Got it. So this can be a pretty open conversation. I have a slide. You could go to the next slide, Megan, for site visits, and I have a slide for the engagement sessions, but you don't need to structure your comments exactly like that if that doesn't work for kind of how you were reflecting. So I really invite everyone to just jump in here and let us know kind of your reflections after reviewing these materials.
Do you want me to take notes inside the slide, Tessa? Is that helpful?
Yeah, if you're willing.
Yeah, I have to drop this and reopen it. Be right back.
Okay, yeah, and Caleb's also taking notes, so you can just capture kind of the main ideas.
Okay.
We'll get the detail.
I could hop in here. Are we just focusing on site visits right now, or just kind of general?
If it's more constructive to just make general comments because you're not just
Okay.
thinking about site visits, that's totally fine.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and kind of reflecting on the questions that were prompted in the email for this meeting and for this discussion right now. I think overall what came to mind for me was, well, first I want to start on the survey responses. I think they were great, and but they're not representative, and I know that was named and explicitly written about and transparent in the report. I think the data from the survey responses would add a visual appeal. It will give us, in parallel with the text, it would add a lot of more visual appeal. But since they're not representative of all the land stewards in California, I think the survey responses maybe should be separate as an exhibit, or the report is referenced. But I just want to start with that as just naming that part. And with all that said, I think the site visits and the engagement sessions, especially the site visits, are going to give us the most, are going to have the strongest impact because they are lived experiences. We have, photos, we have visuals that we could potentially use there. Reading through some of the insights, I feel like, just kind of like high level overall, I feel like what's missing in the participant proposed state actions, should be taken into account and reviewed by the task force itself, and maybe we start with us first, and then consider to add those into the actual recommendation categories that they're relevant to, like land tenure or land return, for example, if there's anything specific that has been recommended by participants. Maybe it's appropriate to add those to the context settings of each of those recommendations if we move forward with that format for the final recommendations. But I feel like just thinking about in addition to what I just mentioned, thinking about like the overall flow and just how the recommendations are going to read, I feel like having some of these stories, some of these site visit engagement information as like a brief description, like not in the sections, but maybe like on the side. Like it reminds me of the 2020 CDFA equity report, where there was like all the text and the recommendations and stuff like that, and then there was like visual components on the side, maybe like a quote, maybe like the case study, something like that. I think would add a lot more visual appeal and just strengthen the language and make it easier to read. So I think like highlighting that would be good in that way versus just incorporating it into some of those sections. Although I am, okay with that as well. But I feel like it is pretty comprehensive, and having that visual appeal would be would strengthen the report overall. And yeah, that's just my initial thoughts so far.
Thank you, Nelson. Question, follow-up question.
Yeah.
Did you have specific site visits that you were thinking of as like a case study and in a specific recommendation or section of the report?
To be fully transparent, I didn't have time to read through all of them, but just reflecting on the site visits just from memory. The one in San Diego where they were leasing from public land and then ended up owning it. I forgot the name of the organization. I'm gonna look through it right now, see if I could pull it up. I think that one was really stuck out to me for a lot of the conversations we're having around like public lands and private lands, and like that dichotomy that we're kind of working through, organizing in the recommendations. What was the name of it? I'm trying to find it.
Yeah, we can look that up.
And
I
we can-
don't remember off the top of my head.
Anybody? Yeah. Yeah, that was one. I think Yeovil was a good one for like the community cooperative, approaches to land stewardship.
Which one? Sorry,
Yeovil, yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
Yeovil.
Project New Village was the one I was talking about.
Okay.
Project New Village, yeah, San Diego.
Great, thank you. That's super helpful. And as far as the survey goes, I think I tracked what you were saying, but just so I'm sure, you were suggesting that the insights from the survey are super important, but should be separate at the end, or like their own summary, or maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's more I need to like look at there, but I feel like because it's not representative of the whole state of California, that maybe we should suggest that more work needs to be done to gather the data, and that could be in the recommendations. And then the report itself is really comprehensive and lengthy. I would suggest that the report itself, and it lays it out all comprehensively and in detail, and all the analysis there is super relevant and should be included, but maybe just as an attachment. And then whatever sections of the recommendation report are relevant to we just to the survey responses that we just maybe reference to the survey report. For example, like there might be there's a section about like what resources are helpful to various land stewards and different demographics, and I think there's a commonality to a lot of those responses, and maybe like referencing and speaking to the common needs that in the patterns that have been observed in those survey responses. But I'm just naming that there's more work to be done to get a accurate representative sample, and I think maybe having sections to describe that in the recommendations, that there is more need, there is a need to gather more data to be representative. And I'm thinking in that approach is more languages, more geographical locations, recommendations on how to approach certain communities, those type of things come to mind. And that's just kind of like getting into the nitty gritty on like, feedback on the survey itself. A lot of relevant data though. I mean, it's important. I'm not trying to knock it overall. I just want to name that there is more work to be done. And I think that it's important for us to be transparent about that in the report. Because if some people see the graphs, they might think, oh, okay, this is, but that may not speak to everybody's experience based on the sample size that we collected.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. Everyone else can feel free to just jump in as well.
I know the language barriers were definitely a factor in providing the translations, whether it was at the session or on the survey. And then now with the last conversations at our meeting, knowing that we need that translation for our report as well is key. Wanted to just mention that off the top, but I do have a case study recommendation, and maybe we can talk more about it tomorrow because it would be Golden Eagle Farm.
Okay.
Specifically, they bought their the farm land there, which is within their ancestral homelands, and then getting that up and operating as a tribal farm, and then putting that, and then that process through to feed a trust process. So there's many complexities in that case study. That would be my first recommendation off the top, but I do have a few more, but that would be my first one.
Great.
To recommend. Yeah.
Do you want to keep going, Emily? Share the others? Or is that still percolating?
I think just that also from the last session we had at Susanville was like the I can't recall if if I mentioned it or if anybody mentioned it, but it was definitely touched on like the spirit of the law and the intention of the law, and that phrase and the need to have those partnerships, because oftentimes when the state or the feds work with the tribes, it's out of compliance and not necessarily out of priority. So what I took from the sessions in Susanville, or the session in Susanville, and then as well as I did the site visit for what Chumney Farm,
Mhm.
and then got to hear about the Palma Tribal Farm, and it was a reoccurring factor between, you know, the sessions and the site visit.
That same theme of
Mhm.
more genuine collaborations, not just out of compliance.
Right, and prioritizing tribal nations within agricultural resources, opportunities, and networks as well. Although, you know, ag land is always going to be on stolen land that is never recognized or mediated in any way. And when I say it like that, it's meant to, you know, if a farmer, you know, wanted to have an individual partnership with the tribes and, you know, creating cultural easements or ag easements as they call them, things like that can come up. I know when where were we? I think it was in Coachella, that there was folks, or not Coachella, sorry, Indio, that they're interested in like applying the traditional ecological knowledge to their farms. Oh no, there was in Central Valley that this came up, that they were interested in applying these practices,
Mhm.
and they just didn't know, you know, how to go about that. So, and that's why I mean, just prioritization of tribal nations, because it's not just saying when I'm using the word tribal nations, I'm also saying like the expertise, right? Not just the individuals, but the application in which traditional agricultural is applied. So,
Mhm.
mhm.
Thank you
Um,
for that.
And then, yeah, when it comes to the actual resources, so those are just partnerships, what I was referring to. But when it comes to the resources, um, understanding and the definitions that these resources are outputting whether it's a funding program or land return, using agricultural land, like that is still you know, a traditional homeland. So, and yeah, I think that's all that's coming up right now.
Thank you
But
so much.
just having that inclusion, because we're talking about equity, but um I think for me what's coming up is the need to enhance through equity, through inclusion of, you know, resources, which you have to define, you know, those documents or the outlines of those programs of the funding have certain definitions that create barriers for tribal nations, tribal governments, starting there and then enhancing through, which came up often, a reoccurring theme was education. And that can be, I seen it was listed as a curriculum, but also just like professional development for farmers, for land stewards, and having those resources available for that, for those opportunities of professional development, um, and education, the educating the youth.
Mhm. Okay. Beautiful. Yeah, there was a lot in there. That's really helpful. You mentioned, so just going back a couple comments, that funding programs and land return programs, those are all operating on traditional homelands. Is that something that you want to emphasize more in the report, or are you kind of thinking about a recommendation around that, or is there any more to say there?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be good to mention that because even though it is obvious, it's not acknowledged enough. And that's why it's not prioritized enough because for one, it's not even acknowledged. So it's not even a thought. When we actually acknowledge it, then we can learn and understand. And the intention is to, prioritize it. But to prioritize it, you have to even understand it in that sense. So yeah, I wouldn't be opposed of including that. I don't know if we want to use the actual language or because we already are in ways, for example, the first rights of refusal is an example of that. Understanding that it is on somebody's homeland and, offering that to them would be the right thing to do. And yeah, so it's in the report in some ways, but I think actually, defining that how you said in your first question would be key too.
Great, maybe adding some more context there. Okay, that's great. Chi, do you want to add to what's been said or share some of your own thoughts?
Yeah, I think it would be great to add some of sample story sharing in our reports. And as an example, I think the site visit that I was organizing with the Asian farmers, I'm having them as an example because I'm more familiar with them and more familiar with their struggles and barriers. So I think there are two main struggles for them. One is the restrictive zoning, and I see it in our report. The goal 8 is support and incentivize changes in zoning and land use planning. I'm wondering if we should put a short blurb of stories, share their farmers' stories and their struggles there. That will make our report more strong. And then another struggles for the Asian farmers. I think also this also applies to other Latino farmers as well. The language barriers is a huge barrier for them to access TAs and access funds and loans from different organizations and different agencies. And I don't know, these kind of story sharing, what kind of story we should pick and which portion we should put in the report. But I think it's worth to mention in those language barriers in the report. And also, I remember there's one time we have a guest speaker. She mentioned that she experienced so many equity issues when she secure tenured land or try to purchase land too. Like the landowners are screening the tenants based on the ratio. So I think that kind of that story shared by the guest speaker can be shared to their. I see the goal 5 is advance and support secure land tenure. I think it makes perfect sense to add a very short or insert there.
That's helpful. Thank you, Chi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. I remember that story.
Yeah.
Goal 5, you said.
Yes, goal 5.
Great. And so this is all really helpful. These are great examples of, improving both the visual layout and also the depth and richness of the information in the report. And when you have to, okay, thanks, Augustine. We have someone in the public here. My question is about format. So are you guys imagining kind of a sidebar like Nelson was saying? Or is this a full pager? It really depends on how much detail you want to be providing. If these are lengthy stories, maybe it's an appendix So yeah, if you can share more thoughts about that, that would be helpful.
Do the stories have to be in written form, or can they be in audio visual format?
I love that question. Well, yeah, I mean, we can look into audiovisual. I think that's a really good question. And obviously it wouldn't be in the report, but maybe it would be like a link to the video or a QR code or something to the video.
Yeah, if that is an option, it could be an option. If not, then yeah, we would have to define how in depth, or I think it would depend on the output of the case study, right? Like what they get from the actual case study, it'll differ, right? For each, or is the case study different from the storytelling that she's talking about?
Oh, I think I was using those terms interchangeably.
Okay, just wanted to clarify too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any preference on your end, Chi, or what you were kind of thinking?
I think both are having good side and not so good side. Having an actual story there, it's visually we see there, and we see this goal or this method or this solution. The solution, the strategy is very important. We need to focus on this. But then it will make the report lengthy. And we already have, I mean,
It's
20,
long
yeah,
already.
29 pages. So
Yeah. Okay.
like Emily said, it's an option. I don't know which option is better.
Yeah. Well, I think we can still do some short written ones, even if we also add audio or visual.
Some of the listening sessions or engagement guest speakers and site visits, they specifically made some recommendations. And some of them, they just shared the story and didn't make specific recommendations. So for those recommendations, should we screen in then to see if we already addressed those recommendations in our report? I haven't checked every single one yet.
Okay. That's a great question. So I think staff is doing a little bit of that just as we are, making the revisions to the report and sending you the next draft. However, today or, in the next couple of days, I would love to know what sparks your attention. So if you are looking through those recommendations from the Coachella Valley summary is top of mind because that's just a document that I was looking at, but they have very, on page 5, like I had said, there's very specific solutions for the state, I think the header says. And so if you are looking through that list and you're like, yes, this, solution should be added, we want to hear that from you. Or maybe you see something that would improve an existing recommendation that's already in the report. We want that type of information from you as well to make sure that we're capturing that.
Page 5 of the engagement session summary.
No, so sorry. I think it's probably page 5 of the Coachella engagement, which is the second one in the summary document. Yeah, sorry, I think I was probably telling you the wrong page number. Let's see. Oh yeah, it is. It should be page 5, Chi. Now I'm looking at it. It says summary of participant proposed state actions. Any other thoughts, Nelson or Emily, about that specific summary? Or Nelson, I know you had also mentioned the eco farm summary and how that's really dense with challenges and solutions. So wanting to kind of think about that as well. What are your thoughts on how that should be integrated?
That one specifically, EcoFarm?
Yeah, well, I just know you
Yeah.
were looking at it and thinking about it.
Yeah. I think our approach to that engagement session was very powerful because, we had breakout sessions and we really were intentional about hearing the perspectives of folks and capturing those on paper and in conversation. I can only speak too much on the group that I led, since that's more in my awareness than reference too much of referencing the group that you led and what James led. My take on that, just off tops, is our conversation was a lot about urban agriculture and ordinances and different approaches to solve land access challenges, and thinking creatively around using existing frameworks and maybe adding to those, and I think that would be relevant to the urban rural linkages sections, for sure. I think there's very specific things to like bolster up and to strengthen relevant sections. That's all that comes to mind at the moment. I'm going to pull it up so I can like reference more information there about that specific engagement. But I think one thing that came to mind, and I don't know how this would flow or fit in well with the overall recommendations, but if we do include those engagement sessions in detail anywhere in the report, I think it'd be valuable to mention the methodology and the approach of those engagement sessions and how we came about getting that information, or engaging with people directly versus like a question and answer type of thing. That was very intimate, and I think it's important to highlight that specific one. I'm not aware about the other conferences and how those approaches were made, or what approaches were conducted there. But I feel like high level, general. I'm reading through it right now. I think there's a lot of overarching and overlapping topics that were brought up as far as solutions, related to community-based management structures, and thinking about how those models could be modeled or replicated or used in the urban agricultural context, and all the nuances and differences of laws and ordinances and things like that are specific to each city or urban area, that may not be applicable to others, but may give insight on how to approach a policy framework to ease the transition to, or not the transition, but the move towards more land security for existing, and then also pathways for future land stewards as well. Zoning is what really comes to mind as like top of the list overall. I mean, not top of the list, but as the common theme there for sure. Those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you. That's helpful. That was a really good segue into kind of part 2 of this discussion, but I just want to, before I move on too abruptly, I want to make sure Chi and Emily, you don't have anything else to add. We'll keep a similar line of conversation, but I do want to expand it a little bit. So.
Oh, real quick, one thing I forgot, but I could wait.
Go ahead.
Leave the floor for Chi and Emily.
Okay.
Go ahead, Nelson.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So I feel like I didn't mention it earlier, but the key insights part that's in the engagement session summaries, I think really focusing on the common themes, I guess, for lack of better words, is not really what I'm trying to say, but I see some commonalities in some of the key insights from the Coachella Valley listening session, and some of the other ones as well, the CAF. I think if there's any like common themes and threads and a lot of things that keep being brought up, I think we really need to like focus on those, not to neglect or to sideline anything else. They're all relevant, they're all important to include, but if there are common themes, it needs to be, I think, brought to the focal point of the recommendations, even if they're just like put into the relevant categories or sections. I think there's always these common themes that keep coming up when it comes to these challenges, and naming those is important.
Thank you. I think we can probably move on. Again, similar line of communication, but I mean, I think something that is pretty apparent and what you guys have all been pointing to is just how much like nuance and how many stories were shared through all of these site visits. I think it's like been 20 site visits now, maybe more or less, maybe 17. The engagement sessions, even guest speakers. I know we don't have any write-up on that yet, but there's too much nuance to, oh, you can keep going, Megan. I see the survey slide. We can always come back to the survey if you guys have anything additional to add. I was just going to move on to kind of talking about like beyond the recommendations is really where I'm trying to get to. So there's so much nuance that you all have really learned and that people have shared with us. And so I'm wondering if there are ways that you want to capture that. And so that's kind of where I felt like you were transitioning us, Nelson, when we were talking about the eco farm summary. There's just so much in there, and you were saying like this is really important for the legislature to understand, but maybe it doesn't quite belong in the context sections of the recommendation goals, or maybe it doesn't fit anywhere in the intro section of the report. So I'm just kind of wanting to push a little bit more and see if you have ideas about that. Is there this like extra level of detail that you may want to capture somewhere? And I think, Emily, you mentioned like video, audio, like that's not directly in the report. So maybe that's one idea to kick us off. And then there's some examples up on the slide too.
Yeah, it's just a different format, just like how the survey is the one format, the audio visual, like whether it's interviews or case study presentation or however that looks, it would just be another option to receive and output the information.
Yeah, exactly. And as far as being effective in sharing these recommendations and sharing this work once it's final, how important does that feel? I mean, that is kind of the other way of asking this question. What's going to be effective for
Well,
your...
ultimately, I think being transparent is always key. So that's important, transparency, but the information is basically intended for, or the recommendations, I should say, not the information, but the information along with the recommendations are really for the governor and legislator. So that's kind of my priority, is like making sure they get it. But of course, being transparent to the folks that are in that report and that will be affected by that report, or those decisions based off those report recommendations anyway. Trying to make sense here.
I think I'm tracking. Yeah. Right. So the report is addressed to the governor and legislature, but perhaps there's other ways of sharing this information with those who it's meant to serve, if implemented. So yeah, and these examples up on the screen are options. They're by no means required. Of course, they all imply, additional work and compilation. I just don't want to lose insights that you all want to make sure are captured, and shared with the appropriate audiences. So that's why I put this question up here. So that's fun.
Another option
Yeah.
could be like how you're facilitating the speaker series,
Mhm.
something similar like that,
Interesting.
to share out whether it's a specific case study or story, or the report summarized verbally, something like that.
Yeah, great idea.
Just having and I don't know if they'd be engagement sessions because it would be more of a listening session, right? At that point, because it would be the final report and it would be information. The intention would be information sharing.
Mhm. Yeah, great idea.
And then with that, giving the option for in-person and virtual, maybe, depending on the funding and the staff and the everything, the logistics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you all want to be involved.
And the task force for sure. Absolutely.
Cool. Okay. Well, this is helpful. I think what I'm hearing is that you all are interested in incorporating as many insights as possible into the report, into the recommendations, with some illustrative stories as sort of pop-outs along the side. We'll look into the audio-visual option. And then looking for key themes across all of the different engagement summaries, making sure those are highlighted. And yeah, like I mentioned at the top, staff will try to incorporate the insights from all of this, but of course, there's kind of too much to incorporate 100% of it. So I
And
think
another question would be more for you guys, the staff and facilitators of who would be doing those case studies. Would it be the like a mix of staff, facilitator, task force, or would it be another hired contractor facilitator? And then I would just recommend, because there's only, I know Darlene had to leave, but there's the 3 task force members on here. I mean, I'm sure the other task force members have other recommendations, and that's why I wanted to keep my recommendation to just one when it came to the case study recommendation, so that I can leave room for other task force members' recommendation. And then understanding, that's when my other question was coming in to play, as to like how many can we actually do though.
Right. And I think that's why the format question is really important, because if we're just thinking of a sidebar in the report, that in many cases, like Chi, you were mentioning, you kind of have an understanding of certain challenges that we could illustrate, or maybe we capture what was already learned in a site visit. And so it could be staff just kind of writing that up, maybe checking back on the details with a task force member or two. So that's one approach. I think that's the quicker, kind of simpler approach. If there's something more extensive that you want to do where it would require an interview or something, then we would have to, exactly to your point, figure out capacity, figure out who's going to conduct the interview or the conversation, and then write that up. And in some cases, I think then we would need to think about, okay, is this an appendix? Is it a separate page on its own, in the middle of the report, or how it then flows with the rest of the recommendations?
That reminded me about a question I had, and thinking about, being mindful about capacity, and we're in the final stretch here for the task force members, especially the staff, and we have a lot of work ahead of us. I really like the idea of the audiovisual component, and I think that would to make it like really robust and high quality, like hiring a professional, videographer crew to do that would be great. And that leads to my question about, can we suggest as our subcommittee that the grant subcommittee create a grant or use some of the funding in the pool to well, my original question with that was about continuing a comprehensive survey and collecting data and research so that those responses in the survey are more comprehensive, and be mindful of the language barriers and all the different components that we need to make it more representative. But the discussion that we're having now also prompted me to ask if we could also suggest that the grant committee maybe use some of the funds, or maybe we as a task force could take action on using some of the funds in the budget to hire a videographer crew to like actually do like a audio visual component with case studies and maybe some other aspects that we would like to include as well. Just a thought that came to mind. I don't know how the right process or order that we would have to go through to get that in.
Yeah.
But that's what came to mind. I know there's two questions there really, but
Yep. I think to the first question, so recommending a comprehensive survey is done. I think this subcommittee can definitely recommend to the full task force that becomes a recommendation. So you add that to your report, like making a recommendation to fund a larger survey, more comprehensive survey with all of the details that you all have talked about today. And then as far as the budget, I think that's a good conversation for the August meeting. I think we will bring up the conversation again of what the work looks like after December. And so maybe some of, the sort of outreach plan with this final report includes some of what you were just talking about, Nelson. But I think, yeah, as far as, and Megan, feel free to jump in here as far as process goes, but this subcommittee definitely can make recommendations to the full task force. That is indeed how this structure works. So.
Okay, but not the grant subcommittee. It's more like we can do it to the task force.
Yeah, well, the grant subcommittee doesn't really have any specific control over the budget, like more so, I think the full task force would be a better place to talk about that.
Got you. Okay, that makes sense.
So yeah, we'll note that down, Nelson, and I think we can just move that into kind of our thinking around the August meeting. And I guess maybe the question is if you want to kind of formally suggest that to the full task force. Megan, is that how we might bring that into the August conversation? I'm like, should it come from the full subcommittee? Maybe Emily and she can give like a approval, or should it just come from Nelson? Sorry, I don't exactly.
Yeah, either way, it would be like a draft that would be ready for review and discussion in August. So I think if we inserted something in the next 2 weeks, that's the time to do it. So it gets back out to everyone for consideration.
Yeah. In the draft, right, okay. So we could, yeah, we could move along some edits in the draft, and then also as far as like a budget conversation goes and this audiovisual piece, I think that's kind of like a larger question about how does the task force want to share out their work. And so I'm thinking maybe that's more of like a discussion during
I think that would be a proposal for the August meeting, with maybe a little, if that's something that seems interesting, we could probably do a little tiny background research into that before we did a full pursuit of costs and analyses and things like that. But we would need some basic parameters to inform that conversation.
Right. Okay, well, let's note it down, and then we can definitely follow up, see what makes most sense. Thanks for suggesting those things, Nelson. Yeah, this is the way that the work gets moved. So it's perfect. Let's go to the next slide. Maybe oh yeah, this looks good. Okay, I know we're 4:30 on a Thursday. I was almost gonna say on a Friday. And it's getting hot in this room, so you guys might be getting sleepy. I'm not sure, but I just have basically 2 more questions. We're kind of almost getting like even bigger now. We're zooming out a little bit more. And another question that I have for you all is thinking back on the year that you've all just kind of completed and all the different outreach that has taken place and is still going to be taking place over the summer. I'm curious if you want to describe this process of outreach the task force has taken to inform your recommendations. And then that kind of flows into making recommendations around what best practices are for outreach and community engagement. So you all were kind of touching on that earlier. Emily, you made some comments, and she might have as well. It's sort of a 2-part question, but I see them as related. So I'm curious what you all think.
Yeah, definitely related. I'm sorry, I'm confused about where these best practice, would it live in the report?
That's a question. I think,
Okay.
yeah, there's different formats. Like maybe it would be an appendix. Maybe it would be its own separate document. It's up to you all, really, about what
Yeah, I think, I don't know if it would be, I'm unsure about if we'd call it best practices, and I'm not opposed either, but I'm only saying that because we can definitely define some of those best practices, but I know there's areas in which we're still learning and haven't identified some of those best practices yet. So as long as we're able to have that balance of transparency, I would be open to it.
Yeah, that's a great point. It could also be more like lessons learned, like a slightly different framing.
Yeah, absolutely. This was, a first of many things when it came to this executive order, to the task force, to the process. So we definitely learned a lot along the way, and I appreciate it because I love to learn.
Any other thoughts about describing the process we did and or sharing out on what improvements could help?
It could also, sorry, this is the last thing. It could also mention things we didn't necessarily get to that we wanted to include or get to, or put, funding towards, or whatever that may look like for the task force members. But it can also have that part of it too.
And when you say what we didn't get to, can you say more about that? Are you talking about recommendations?
Whether it was, just more outreach sessions, stuff like that. These are just the first things that are coming up, but I know there was some other factors as well, but not necessarily that came from me. So I can't really speak on them right now because it's a little foggy.
Fair. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. And just to add to it, I like the framing of the lessons learned over, best practices. Maybe we can reframe that as like the next steps after lessons learned. This is what we learned. This is what we did. I think it's really important for us to be transparent about the approach. That way, folks reading it, our audience, knows how our community engagement process was implemented. And then, being transparent about the work continues and there's more to be done to strengthen our information, our data, our ways to just engage with the people that have been most impacted, and to have ground truthing approaches to solving these challenges, or at least working towards, you know, I want to say solving the challenges. That's not really what I mean, but you know, really creating the equitable society that we are working towards. You know, there's a lot of work to be done, and so kind of like creating a pathway on those next steps is extremely important. I was struggling with like thinking about where this would best fit in the flow of the recommendations. I don't want to just put it like, oh, it's its own section as an exhibit or an addendum, or like after, you know, I feel like, you know, it just kind of like gets brushed under the rug when we do that. However, there is a lot of information that is valuable, and you know, maybe there is a section on a community engagement strategy that is put in somewhere. Maybe it's in the overview, maybe it's in the executive summary, probably in the overview, maybe makes more sense. I'm not quite sure at the moment, or a standalone section, but I think it is important to at least have a brief description about our process, lessons learned, and then, you know, how that work can continue and be improved in future efforts within the task force, or other efforts, you know, in the legislators, or organization wide, or, you know, regionally, those type of things.
Great. Thank you. That's really helpful.
I think it would be also helpful for the staff and facilitators to be part of that feedback, not just the task force members. So we want to know, you know, on their end as well.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Yeah, we have like the really nitty-gritty admin details that we could share with you guys. And so, yeah, I think we would happily contribute to that. I do think that this subcommittee is probably the best place for that document to start, whatever section, whatever we want to call it, to start. So I am thinking maybe between now and the next subcommittee meeting, yeah, we'll just think about how to maybe generate like a draft language that you all could help build and comment on. And then of course it would go to the full task force at some point as well.
To me, this feels like a really important reflections piece that could go well either at the back end of the document, outside of the recommendations, or as like a compendium piece. I do think that this process is very unique, though, in the way that the task force engaged with the community in so many different formats, and it's pretty exemplary. This task force really went above and beyond, and I've been doing this for 18 years. This is the most extensive amount of public outreach for any type of similar effort that I've witnessed or been involved in. So I think there's a lot to say there. At the same time, I just want us to think about not, Nelson, you kind of hinted at this, but not taking away from the impact of the recommendations themselves. So I'm feeling like hearing all of this and then thinking about like the size of the report and stuff already, and wanting to make it as impactful as possible to the reader, knowing you've got limited attention span with whoever picks it up, is kind of a statement up front that really highlights the amount of engagement that was conducted, how the conversations that you had along the way, whether it was speakers, site visits, engagement sessions, or the survey analysis itself, really informed and kind of ground truth a lot of the different, or all of the topics that are discussed within the body of the recommendations, whether it's anecdotal evidence or, you can, or case studies, those types of things. And then maybe in the back, like at the end, we can call it an appendix or whatever. It's more of a robust conversation about what we were able to do, what we wish we could have done, what we learned along the way. I think that would be really valuable.
Yeah, thanks for that, Megan. Yeah, and I think we will have
Yeah.
a more, sorry, does someone want to?
Just to add to that, and then like wherever we briefly mention it within the report itself, just reference to that, like point people to get more information in the appendix or wherever all these details, because even like these attachments that we got to prepare for this meeting, I think in and of themselves that could be the appendix, or maybe clean it up or summarize it a little bit, however you want to format that or organize it or articulate that. But yeah, referencing to it so that we can point people to go to see more of our in-depth information that we were able to harvest from our engagement approaches.
Yeah. Chi, did you want to jump in and add anything else?
I wanted to, sorry to jump to another topic. Before we end the meeting, I just wanted to mention that when we share those stories and case studies, we should be mindful about sharing those farmers' info. I had a phone call this morning with the farmer that we had that site visit and asking and kind of letting them know their comments or recommendations has been heard by the task force, and we kind of thank them for providing that recommendation. But then they bring a topic, say, is this going to cause trouble to them because they're not supposed to live in that aluminum house on that farm? So he's worried that they're gonna get in trouble because they're sharing their stories to the public.
Yeah. It's a really important point. We can keep everything anonymous, especially at the request of anyone at any time. We will not put anyone's name or personal details or story in the report where we don't get explicit approval.
Yeah.
So thank you for saying that. And I think these site visit summaries, that's a really good point. We should probably review those and make sure that there's no summaries online. That would be doing just what you're saying. So
yeah.
review
But
that.
overall, they're happy that their recommendations get to the full task force.
Great. Thank you for sharing that with them.
Sure.
Perfect. Okay. I think we're probably ready to move on unless anyone else wants to jump in. We have 20 more minutes, but I don't think we'll need it. Next meeting date. So let me see.
So the only things, sorry, like jumping in with my few brain cells remaining for the rest of the day. We hadn't planned to schedule another meeting, a subcommittee meeting before August, unless there was some real need to do that. But we were thinking that it might be useful to schedule something in September. The things that I'm hearing from today's conversation are that maybe we could work together to build out a case study or 2 or 3 or 4 to insert at the appropriate goals to kind of bolster and give reflection to those goals. And also this piece on describing the outreach process and discussing lessons learned there. So what do you all think? Do you think that's something we should be working on together as a subcommittee?
Yeah, we can start that for sure.
How do you feel about that, Tessa? Getting some work done, maybe like a little platform for something to launch and then reconvening as a group in September, a couple weeks after
Yeah.
the meeting?
I think that's a great idea. I think we have examples that you all shared, and we might reach out for the details of those examples. And then with that information, we can move the case study or the, farmer story through the working group that it might be most related to. So, yeah, and then I think that sounds great. So yeah, I can, work with, well, we can all work, the staff, can work together on, I guess, maybe the format of that in the report. We're also working with the comms team, so I think I'll just need to check in with them about kind of those timelines. And we'll pass this along. So yeah, anything else to say about that or other next steps from the meeting? I know we have a couple here up on the screen, but what are other next steps?
I know that task force members were asked to give some feedback. Well, all task force members were asked to give any remaining feedback on the May version of the draft report to staff by June 1st. So that's Monday or Sunday. So Monday, basically, we've already gotten some feedback. We're working to compile it, but Monday is kind of like the drop dead date because it's a lot to pull together. But you all mentioned a few of those case studies today. So if you haven't yet submitted your comments and you do have other ideas or you kind of spark some ideas and you're like, hey, this story would be great to tell in relationship to this goal. I mean, we got a couple from you today. Just add that in. And you can always send stuff. We don't have to wait until subcommittee meetings to get your input. You can always email staff directly or call us. Also works too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and then we'll look into the audiovisual question. We can also add the, recommending a more comprehensive survey. We can figure out where that may go in the report. And I think making sure to highlight in the current draft of the report all of the insights that you all really pointed to today in your review of those materials. So I think we have, a few of those next steps from this conversation, and then attending community engagement sessions. So that's just in reference to the tribal sessions that we have coming up, and potential for site visits in Arcata.
Sorry, Tessa. I saw attending community engagement sessions. I thought last time you mentioned to me task force members are not allowed to attend community engagement sessions for their UCNR ones, right?
Yeah, so these are just the tribal community engagement sessions, which we are still coordinating in collaboration with the tribal members of the task force.
So it's attending tribal engagement sessions.
Yeah, this may be more of like a specific comment for Darlene and Emily, who will be supporting and co-hosting these sessions. So I think you maybe can just disregard this, but we can also think about Arcata and thinking about site visits. So sorry for that confusing bullet point. You're right, the UCNR sessions are closed. So the last point on here is about the tribal leader letter. I mentioned at the top of the meeting that, we're quickly working to get that out. And just wanted to note that we will call on this subcommittee first, and of course the tribal members of the task force and the other members of the task force if and when needed. So as soon as we start getting responses from tribal nations in response to the letter, we'll let you all know. And then it will really depend on the amount of responses that we get. If we get a lot, we're gonna recruit all of you to support those meetings. We want you to be in those meetings if you have capacity regardless, but we'll definitely call on you if we need to start dividing them up depending on how many we get. So just wanted to note that here. We'll keep you updated on that process. And what do you think, Megan? Should we schedule the next meeting a bit later just because it is so far out?
I think so.
So we'll think about that.
We have multiple notes into folks for scheduling things that come up a little more quickly. So let's
Okay.
stop on that.
Fair. Okay, great. Well, are there any final comments before we close out?
Yeah, real quick, speaking on the next subcommittee meeting, if I heard correctly, that's going to be in September, likely.
I think so.
Yeah.
Most. So, okay, so I'm assuming that all of our engagement sessions and efforts will be wrapped up by then, and we'll if that's the case, then what's our focus at that point? Like analyzing it or just fine tuning it, incorporating more, looking at the engagement sessions that are on the horizon from here, moving until then.
That's a really good question, Nelson. We don't need to schedule that meeting yet, like precisely for what you're asking. I think if there's nothing to discuss with this group specifically, we don't need to schedule it. There's just always things that come up. So we might need to revisit this audio visual question. Maybe we'll have you review the farmer stories that end up in the report. There might be more review of engagement.
If we develop that piece that's reflections and lessons learned on the outreach and engagement process itself, we'll probably want to talk through details of that. Okay. Most likely because, well, in August, we'll really need to focus time for the full task force to continue to work through the recommendations themselves. So we won't be able to, it will be unlikely we'll be able to spend a lot of time on working through that type of a draft.
Right, that's for this committee. Yeah, good point.
Okay, that makes sense.
But we can assess, capacity and timing and all of that when we get closer.
Sounds good. Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Thanks for a productive conversation, everyone. Thanks for all the sharing that you did and yeah, your active engagement. Really appreciate it.
No public members are left with us, and I'm just flashing up on screen the two other subcommittees that we do have scheduled. We did keep on the schedule: June 25th, AB 524, and June 27th, Grants and Resources. And then we'll meet you all in Arcata on August 13th and 14th for the full task force meeting.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. You
Thank
too.
you. Bye.
Peace.
Bye.